Welcome to Skill Set Counseling. My name is Dr. Felicia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. And today I'm going to be answering the question, will I have OCD forever? Is OCD permanent? This is an understandable question. OCD is a tormenting condition, and it can feel draining day after day to try and ward off obsessions or try to resist engaging in compulsions, despite your best efforts and your loved ones and those around you. When we think about the course of OCD and how symptoms can look over time, there is something called spontaneous remission. And that is when OCD symptoms resolve on their own without any type of treatment or intervention. That outcome is pretty rare. When people get treatment for OCD, usually what ends up happening is that the intensity and the duration and the frequency of symptoms lessens over time. And that's usually with either medication alone or a treatment of medication alone, therapy alone, or a combination of medication and treatment. Now, on my channel, I talk mostly about exposure response prevention, which is the first line gold standard non-medical treatment for OCD. Okay, so when people are getting ERP, it's really important to remember the attitude and be aware of the attitude that you go into treatment with. If you go into treatment having this agenda of needing to get rid of obsessions, needing to get rid of anxiety, having this agenda of control, it's going to be disappointing and even counterproductive while you're in treatment. And I'm going to explain why. So if I tell you, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think about anything else in the world except pink elephants, what do you think is going to happen? So I'd like you to try it. Close your eyes and think about anything in the world, but you cannot think about pink elephants. Let's try that for a few seconds. Did you try it? Did you try it? So I'd like to know what happened when you tried it. Did you not think about pink elephants? Were you successful? And I'm sure you're probably shaking your head and smiling to yourself, no, it didn't work, right? I'm sure probably before I told you not to think about pink elephants, pink elephants weren't on your mind at all. But when I had you do this exercise, you did think about pink elephants. Maybe it was elephants, maybe it was something pink, maybe it was seeing pink elephants everywhere. But regardless, you can't be successful in not thinking about something, right? And so it's the same thing on a similar vein with going into treatment and expecting to get rid of a certain type of feeling or get rid of obsessions and unwanted or intrusive thoughts, urges, and images. It doesn't work. And what ends up happening is that that sensation, that thought ends up becoming more intense. Okay, and that is known as the rebound effect when you're trying to thought suppress. Okay, so when you think about that and you go into treatment and you're like, well, I never want to have obsessions again, and this is my goal to not think about this, it often gets worse. And even in general, when you're going through the course of ERP treatment, sometimes obsessions do get worse. That's just par for the course. Okay, but the point is when you are in ERP, the goal is to change how you relate to those intrusive thoughts, urges, and images. You want to change your response. You can't control what comes into your mind. There are certain things that you try to do when you have OCD to avoid being triggered. But in general, people who go through treatment and go through treatment successfully often will say, yeah, sometimes I do have these obsessions, but I'm changing the way I relate to them. I'm changing how I respond, right? And so what happens through ERP is that when you have, first of all, you're put in situations, and I've said this in several of my videos before, if you're not familiar with them, take a minute to go through the playlist and look at the videos I have on OCD. But when we are getting treatment for OCD to target the obsessions, we do what is known as exposure. That's the first part of ERP, and that puts you in situations or introduces you to triggers that you have commonly avoided because you do not want to experience obsessions. Okay, so it's important to go into treatment with the understanding and the attitude that the goal is not to get rid of these obsessions, but rather how you relate to them. And so you're going to be put in situations where, for instance, let's say you have obsessive thoughts about germs, watching somebody cut meat or touching a piece of raw meat, things like that. And I know that there's several other subtypes of OCD, but right now I'm just focusing on some of the most common ones, which are, or commonly known ones, which are contamination. So let's say it's an issue with contamination, something, having an exposure situation where you are experiencing those intrusive urges, thoughts, and images. However, ERP will teach you how to respond to them differently. So instead of going and washing your hands right away, or trying to think of something clean, or visualizing washing your hands, you are going to envision the germs, and you're going to envision whatever you've been trying to avoid, or delay washing your hands for an increasingly longer amount of time. Okay, so basically ERP teaches you to change how you respond to those obsessions. And that's the goal of treatment, not to get rid of anything. Even the anxiety, the shame, the guilt, the disgust, a lot of times we, as human beings, we don't like unpleasant emotions. And so we do whatever we can to get rid of them. But ERP teaches you that these unpleasant emotions, as challenging as they are, as uncomfortable as they are not something that you have to always run away from and always avoid. And in fact, what ends up happening is that even if those uncomfortable feelings don't come down, you learn that you still can achieve what you are wanting despite those challenging emotions being there. Okay, so if you think about the things that you try to avoid all the time because you don't want to feel shame, guilt, disgust, or anxiety, you learn that through, you learn this through doing ERP exercises, that actually you can do what you've been trying to avoid or what you thought was impossible with those feelings still hanging out in the background. And that's why it's really important to not have this mission or this goal of getting rid of certain feelings or getting rid of obsessions or getting rid of anxiety. And I'm not trying to say that when you do these exercises that you're always going to have high intense, challenging feelings. Over time, generally what people respond to, or generally what people report rather, is that their anxiety comes down a bit. The shame, the disgust, just the horrible emotions that they have tend to decrease in intensity. And that is because you're not using compulsions as a way to try and reduce these. This is something else I talk about in my videos, but when you're often engaging in compulsions, what they do is they just maintain those levels of uncomfortable feelings that you're trying to avoid, or even makes them worse. You might temporarily feel a little bit of relief, but that relief is only temporary. And so that's why, again, it's really important that when you go into treatment and when you're doing these exercises, and it's something that takes practice. It's not something that just comes to you overnight or even in, a few sessions. It takes regular practice. You have to learn over and over again, or actually implement those skills over and over again. But what you'll find is that, look, whether the anxiety decreases by half, or whether the feelings of disgust or just general discomfort don't come down, you're still able to do what you once avoided. And that's the key to ERP. So, and another thing is that oftentimes as people progress through their ERP treatment, they find that they are more present and they're more engaged. They're not living in their heads as much. And that's a really important benefit. And so, so when they're around loved ones, when they're doing tasks that they enjoy, when they're just living life, they're not consumed by these obsessions and the need to do compulsions. And so that's really important to remember as you are doing ERP, as you're thinking about it or looking at treatment. Don't go into it with this goal or the agenda of, I have to get rid of all my obsessions. The intrusive thoughts are what they are. And as you are going through ERP, you will learn how to change how you respond to them. And as you do that, you will find that you are more meaningful and more present in your interactions and your general activities. So if you are interested in learning more about ERP, go ahead and book a consultation on my website. The website is skillsetcounseling.com. You can also click on the link in the description box to go ahead and book a consultation, and the consultation is free. May you have a day filled with peace. Bye-bye.